Welcome everyone. My name is Jennifer Chang. I'm the research fellow at the Global Taiwan Institute, and GTI is a 501c think tank dedicated to policy research on Taiwan. Our mission is to enhance the U.S.-Taiwan relationship by contributing to a more informed policy discussion on Taiwan. And at GTI, we undertake several important programs. First is our Global Taiwan Brief. It's a bi-weekly publication featuring timely policy analyses by policy experts and rising scholars here in the US, Taiwan, and elsewhere. We also organize regular public seminars to highlight key issues related to Taiwan and US-Taiwan relations. We also host an annual symposium in the fall, inviting leading experts and policymakers to explore various aspects of security, diplomatic, economic issues related to Taiwan and in the Indo-Pacific region. And we just held our annual symposium last month. Finally, we host cultural programs, including movie nights and cultural performances. And you can find more information about GTI on our website at globaltaiwan.org. Today's public seminar is our first one of the fall, following our annual symposium last month. And this public seminar is part of the Civil Society and Democracy series and is partially funded by the Taiwan Foundation for Democracy. I'm happy to moderate this panel with distinguished experts examining Taiwan's demographic issues and the implications on the economy and politics, among other important issues. If we look at the messages that we've heard from Taiwan's leaders, there's one statistic that's often mentioned, and that is Taiwan's population. You often hear Taiwanese leaders in the government proclaiming that the 23 million people of Taiwan need to have their voices heard in cross-strait relations and in the international community. For example, the day before Xi Jinping was set to give his message to compatriots on Taiwan address in January of this year, Taiwanese President Tsai Ing-wen said in her New Year's speech that Beijing must appreciate that the Republic of China on Taiwan has existed for a long time, and it must respect the choice of Taiwan's 23 million people to live in freedom and in a democratic system. And you've heard past presidents also speaking or citing this number, 23 million people of Taiwan. You often hear that the future of the country should be determined by its 23 million people. However, if Taiwan's falling birth rate does not change over the long run, then Taiwanese politicians will need to revise this, the statistics. By 2060, they might refer to Taiwan's 19 million people whose voices need to be heard. In fact, Taiwan's National Development Council predicts that the island's population will start declining as early as 2022 and estimates that Taiwan's population could reach between 17.3 million and 19.8 million in 2060. The population is expected to peak between 2021 and 2025 to reach 24 million, but after that, the population is expected to decline. So when you hear this message of a difference of 4 million people from 23 million, it's actually 23.7 million to potentially 19 million or lower, I think the message becomes less powerful. And that's because more people means more representation, and it bears more weight to justify certain national goals, such as representation in cross-strait relations or in the international community. So right now, Taiwan's birth rate is 1.06 children in 2018, according to government statistics. And Taiwan needs a birth rate of 2.1 children to maintain its current population. The good news is that Taiwanese people are living longer. So the average life expectancy in 2018 was 80.7 years of age. Taiwanese men average about 77.5 years, while women reach about 84 years old. Practically speaking, what will this decline in Taiwan's population have on the economy, economic productivity? Will Taiwan need to rely more on foreign workers, on automation to fill in gaps in the labor market? What is going to be the stress on the healthcare system, and how will this affect Taiwanese politics and its national strength? Past presidents have declared that Taiwan's low birth rate is a national security issue, as there will be reduced military recruits, and this would impact the military's operational strength. So our esteemed panel of experts will discuss Taiwan's demographic trends and its domestic implications, as well as offer a comparative perspective with Japan and South Korea's aging societies. First, Tsuann will discuss how Taiwan's demographic trends will impact economic productivity, healthcare, and human capital. Next, Fang-Yu will discuss some factors behind Taiwan's low birth rates and the Taiwan government's policies and actions to address these demographic challenges. And finally, Eberstadt will discuss demographic trends in Japan and South Korea and the lessons that these aging societies might have for Taiwan. So first I'll introduce the panelists. Tsuann is an assistant professor in the Department of Medical Sociology and Social Work at Zhongshan Medical University in Taichung, Taiwan. She's also the executive director of the Taichung City Dementia Integrated Center. She teaches gerontology and aging policies and programs. In addition to these positions, she is also very active in the nonprofit sector. She holds a number of other positions, including president of the Taiwan Association of Family Caregivers and the Shan Culture and Education Foundation. And she's a board member for the Red Cross in Taichung City, the Taiwan Association of Gerontology, and the Yongxin Social Welfare Foundation. Next to her is Fang-Yu. He's currently a visiting fellow at GTI and also a PhD candidate in political science at Michigan State University, with research interests in authoritarian politics, party politics, and political behavior in new democracies. He is a co-founder and co-editor of the website Who Governs Taiwan, and he's also on the editorial team of US-Taiwan Watch, which reports issues related to US-Taiwan-China relations. Next to him is Nicholas Eberstadt. He is a Henry Wendt Chair in Political Economy at the American Enterprise Institute, where he researches and writes on demographics and economic development, as well as international security in the Korean Peninsula and Asia. Dr. Eberstadt is also senior advisor to the National Bureau of Asian Research. He is a prolific author and writer and has testified before Congress on numerous occasions, and also has served as a consultant within the U.S. government. So we'll have each panelist open with 10 minutes of remarks, and then we'll have a moderated discussion.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Jennifer, for introducing, and GTI for inviting me. I arrived last night midnight, so hopefully, I'm still okay with the PowerPoint presentation and everything. Nice to be back to DC. Okay, so my talk is going to be on demographic changes in Taiwan and implications for the aging society. I'm a trained gerontologist and teach in aging policies. So my focus is more going to be on the huge amount of older adults and how that impacts Taiwan society. For any of you that wants a little background about Taiwan, I think right now Taiwan is the fastest aging country in the world, fairly compared with Korea, and exceeding Japan now. And this is a little bit of Taiwan statistics, in case that you wanted to know. But the third point that I wanted to point out is the life expectancy. It's about the same as the United States. And the employment rate is relatively low. The health of Taiwan, as you can expect it, the life expectancy is about the same as the United States. So are the leading causes of death between the US and Taiwan, a lot of chronic illnesses. The only difference is that the US has more incidents, accidents, and dementia, while Taiwan has more liver diseases and kidney diseases. Because of demography, I wanted to really point out the top part of this pyramid is that in 2018, last year, the upper left is the Taiwan demography. The bottom is the young child, and then up the top is the 100-year-old centenarians. As you can tell, that in about less than 8 years, the right upper corner of the demographic chart, that Taiwan is going to be very top heavy, whereas the bottom two are the United States. Between the left hand side is 2018 and 2025. Not changed as dramatic as Taiwan. So Taiwan, as I share with you, that it's going to be the fastest aging country in the world. This is the line that the green line inclining up. You can see how steep it is. Following almost intact with the line is Korea and Singapore. China is catching up slowly, the very little dark shade gray over there. Whereas the United States is the little blue one that's just rising, not as sharp as the Asian countries. So this is another graphic that shows you, even though Japan is the oldest right now, or has the most percentage of population is over 65 and older, Taiwan is catching up with, along with South Korea, and China is actually rising really fast as well. Interestingly, that in a lot of Southeast Asian countries, they are aging very slowly, but because of their population is also a large amount. A lot of more developed Asian countries are very dependent on the human labor of the Southeast Asian countries. However, in about 15 years, the Southeast Asian countries, they're going to be aging themselves. So there might be a prediction that there won't be as many people come out to the developed countries to work. Okay, and then so to give you another graphics of the Taiwan demography, the top pink part is the number of people who are 65 and older. As you can tell that right now we are at about 14%. I don't know if I can point. Yeah, okay, we are at 14%. In less than 8 years, it's going to be 20%. That's like 1 in 5 people are going to be 65 and older. And that's technically called a super age society in about 8 years. So because of that, just to give you also a dramatic change of the demography, compared with 1993, which is just about a little bit over 15 years ago, this is like how many folds that it increases. As you can tell that the oldest 85 years and older, compared with 15 years ago, it increased 5 folds and 8 folds and 11 folds and 9 folds. So we will have a lot of centenarians. Centenarians grew almost 10-fold in the last 15 years, and it's going to continue to grow. Okay, and because of that, I'm just going to focus on the 3 major impacts. The first one is that there will be a lot of people retiring, so their economic pension and the economic security issue is going to be at hand. As the Thai government recently, or when it was the first thing that she did to really try to moderate or try to stabilize the pension system. And then the second one is there will be a lot of people living in the communities. Of course, there will be people living in the communities, but I wanted to point out as a gerontologist that there will be a lot of active people, active older adults who can really do a lot. That's also an untapped human resource population that the country has not been tapping yet. And then third one is the increasing number of people needing care, which is more of on my side of specialty about long-term care and healthcare. Okay, so I'm going to talk about these 3 impacts a little bit more detail. In terms of the economic security, there's going to be a little, I'm showing a little graphs. I'm sorry that it might be a little small, but just, for all the graphs, and then I have a little bit of caption here. There will be a big reduction of older veterans, changing from, I have to really changing from 151 to it's about reduced by 50% as they get older. However, this is counterbalanced by increased number of older adults in poverty. And there are several reasons contributing to older adults who are in poverty. One of the first reasons is because of the uneven distribution of the pension system. And then a small increased number of older indigenous population as well. Okay, so, and then but on the flip side, in terms of the pension, there will be a lot of people turning still healthy and then relatively capable and physically fit to really have the second job. We call it golden careers, known as the second career, probably, you know, for nowadays in modern society, probably fourth or fifth or sixth career. A lot of, like for instance in Japan, about 8 million older adults who are still in labor force and who can still work. In Taiwan, this is, as I mentioned, that it's still an untapped human resources that we are not really focusing on as much as Japan and Korea. So, and then in terms of active aging, there will be a lot of people living in the community, and that's why what I'm focusing on in recent years is to help the government establish a good long-term care system that really is community-based instead of institutionalized-based. So in terms of the active aging part, we are focusing on social engagement of older adults, creating opportunities and lifelong learning opportunities, similar mirror to the United States. We are promoting productive aging, really increasing the number of people, older adults who can volunteer and also engage in family affairs, meaning like they become grandparenting, you know, for their grandchildren. Because they're relatively still healthy, and then so we wanted to really prevent them from getting frail. So the government throw a lot of budget and resources on doing health promotion and frailty reduction. And the number of budget, this is the number of budget, I'm sorry that it's in Chinese, I couldn't really like translate it into English, but as just wanted to share with you that the percentage of social services and health services budget in terms of the annual budget is about 25% right now. So, I mean, as a capitalistic society, I think this is a lot. Okay, so just do a little, you know, break. This is an annual competition of older adults show, we call it Active Aging Show, and then it's on a huge stage of like a live, you know, live concert halls and things like that. So it's becoming an annual big thing for every municipal cities because each city selects their own top 3 teams, and then they compete in Taipei for the final round. However, I wanted to point it out to you that because there's a difference between gender on gender in terms of life expectancy, women tend to outlive men by 8 years. This is another issue that we wanted to focus on is double or triple jeopardy because women tend to have poorer health, and because of this, at least this generation, they have lower income. So, however, they are very active engaging in social activities and things like that. Men don't really come out that much. It's the women who really came out and then, you know, and then perform. Yeah. And then this is a project that I am involved in as well to select ordinary older adults and turn them into silver legends. Basically, they have a wealth of skills and knowledge and probably resilience in their life. And then so I do a life story and life review on my spare times. And then so I turn them into silver legends, and they can really work in a community and then really teach young kids or influence others to how to be active in daily lives. Okay, lastly is the healthcare and long-term care. And I don't know if you're interested in this part, but this is something that I think Taiwan should be very, very proud in the last 10 years, even though we constantly, you know, kind of worry about the budget and the sustainability, but it's still relatively okay right now compared with other Western countries. Taiwan has a really, really good healthcare, as many of you probably know. Here is the number that I wanted to show you is the healthcare expenditure of GDP is only about 6.6% compared with the United States. I think we all know it's out of the chart right now, right? Actually, so this is the United States, this is Taiwan as part of GDP. So we have very good healthcare. And our number of beds and the number of hospitals per 10,000 people are mirrors the United States, but our number of beds in hospitals are double as the number as the United States. So about the same number of hospitals, but twice more hospital beds in Taiwan than in the United States. Okay, and then so because of the aging population, what the government has really focused on in the past 10 or 13 years is the long-term care system. Besides the universal health care system, that we also have a universal long-term care system, which is really something that a lot of people are envious about. So people who qualify for long-term care, the government pays for 84% of the long-term care services, and then the out-of-pocket cost is only about 16% for regular families. For people in poverty or below poverty, that government subsidize more. So we basically think of long-term care as 5 stages. As you can probably see from here, there are about 60% of people who are still healthy, about like 10-15 people, or like 20% of people who are, we call it sub-healthy. I don't know if there's lack of a better word, but some people who might have a little functional limitation, they may need cans or some kind of devices to still live ordinarily. And then there are people with cognitive limitation and bedridden. This is about 10% of the whole long-term care population. And there are different focuses on for different categories. In terms of healthy category, we still do a lot of health promotion. For the less healthy, we do frailty prevention, and this is starting to kick in a lot of long-term care services like the United States, such as home care, adult care, and group homes. And if people are, needing institutions, there are institution and palliative care available for people. So this is our official picture of the long-term care 2.0, from healthy to, to the end of life. There are 17 major services available for people in Taiwan. I really encourage you to, retire in Taiwan. This is compared with the cost of long-term care costs in the United States. This is like 10% of the, and I myself am in charge of 3 of them, heading for national directions and things like that. So we are really, really busy, and it's going to be quite a topic for the upcoming election as well, because this part really determines how healthy, relatively labor healthy, that Taiwan can be. Because one of the topics that I most specialize on is the family care program, because of the aging population, as what Jennifer said earlier, the low fertility rate. The number of family caregivers available to care for family members is really, really decreasing. So we are watching carefully about the labor force, because there are a lot of people who are quitting jobs because they need to quit jobs to go home and take care of their older adults. And these are relatively very productive people in their mid-career. So there's about 130,000 people quit jobs for family caregiving every year. So, okay, but talking about these, I also wanted to really, because today's topic is something about economy as well. I wanted to also point out that they are also big spenders, big buyers as well. Older adults spend and then pays for more than half of the hospital stays, and then they buy more than half of the medical equipment and assist devices in Taiwan. The baby boomers are coming up, and then they really are relatively wealthy, and then have leisure time, and then they do a lot of online shopping. We did a survey that who did online shopping the most is the baby boomers instead of the young people. Okay, so for the summary, I just wanted to point out that the population aging created never before human resources. As I share with you that there are 70% of the older adults, which is about 2 million people who are still capable of contributing to the society through any kind of social engagement or redirection of their job expertise or life expertise. The second one is phase aging rate require an infrastructure to prepare for an aging society, which we are really doing in a hurry because it's going to be the fastest aging country in the world. So in 8 years, we're going to hit the super age society. The last is the public budget to ensure fair development for all generations. Because I, as a gerontologist, also wanted to watch out for any kind of tension between generations. In an aging society, usually when it's about 7% of 7% of older adults of the total population, you kind of respect the elderly and everything. And when it hits 14%, you kind of just be aware of, oh, there are a lot of older folks around. Like in the United States, it's about 14% too. When it hit 20% of the total population, that's has older population, people are starting to wonder, there are too many of them. So there's going to be creating a lot of tension, generational tensions in the 8 years. So this is another thing that we wanted to watch out for. So that sort of summarizes my talk. And sorry, it took a little longer, but I wanted to share that with you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Guo. This was a very informative presentation. I especially like your point about you have a group of kind of aging or seniors who are kind of untapped. They're still not yet, they're still very active and mobile, and so maybe in terms of like volunteer work, they could be kind of the untapped potential. So now we'll turn to Fang-Yu, who will discuss some of the other factors behind the low birth rates and also discuss Taiwan's government policies to address these.
Okay, thanks for inviting me to join this discussion, and I have learned a lot from Dr. Guo. I will follow the discussion and talk about 2 main points. The first is the structural origins of the demographic challenges and why they have not been adequately located in Taiwan's political agenda. And second, how societies, including Taiwan and the US, face some problems as a result of increased Chinese immigration and students amid rising debt. So first of all, the demographic problems may be originated from what have been called as the high income trap. That is, when the economy enters the post-industrialized era and undergoing certain economic transitions, and the wage may be stagnated, and the society is suffering from the higher housing price and the growing inequality, and partly because of policy of quantitative ease. People are not able to afford and thus not willing to have kids. So in fact, Taiwan officially became aging society 26 years ago in 1993, when percentage of people over 65 years of age exceeded 7%. However, the trend of the aging society has been continuing. Admittedly, the government has done a lot of policies, just as Dr. Guo mentioned. I'm not criticizing what has been done, but just to mention some limits of these policies. So here I summarize some observations from several experts from NGO sectors and to somewhat several factors that shape the current trend of the low birth rates. So first, generally speaking, I think Taiwanese social attitudes are conservative. That is, especially among people who grow up from traditional societies. So taking care of the kids and family members are seen as individual responsibilities of the family itself, and most of burden put on women. For example, I consulted with an NGO member who said that some government officials fear that the public care system for kids will, quote, make mothers too lazy to care for their kids, end quote. That is in the bureaucratic level. So in the traditional perspective, all responsibility is on individuals. Thus, there is little momentum for the policy change. Another example is from the former minister without portfolio, Professor Shan, who is in charge of the social policies in the Ma-Ying-jeou administration. He thinks that the main reason of low birth rate is because of that people get married too late in their life. So he proposed the solution is to encourage people to get married earlier. However, a low birth rate and getting married later are actually the same problem, not a cause and effect. So without tackling the problems of long working hours, low growth rate on real wage, and skyrocketing housing prices, and the lack of the public care system, it is extremely difficult for young couples to get married, not to have mentioned to have kids. And second, the bureaucratic system has some structural limits to its ability to come up with solutions. So currently, the National Development Council, the NDC, is the main institution that does research and policy suggestions, but they do not have executive authority, only being able to provide suggestions. So besides NDC, there seems to be no central authority that targets the demographic change, because this issue contains too many different dimensions, as in education, social welfare, public health, and also involves the Interior Ministry. And there's a limited personnel to deal with these issues in each sector. For example, in the Ministry of Social Welfare and Public Health, the staff are quite busy maintaining the regular services, welfare services, but they are not able to maybe formulate a big picture policy. Some bureaucratic positions are even filled with temporary contractors, not the permanent civil servants. This problem exists in central government as well as in the local governments. And third, from the power relations perspective, in the past 2 decades, the government policies has introduced several plans on subsidies. This is partly due to the lobbying activities by private care service providers, such as private kindergartens. For example, 2 years ago, the government introduced plans to boost public kindergartens. However, the policy turned out to be subsidies to private kindergartens to lower the tuition. And people wonder why doesn't the government choose a plan to build more public service for childcare? And apparently that's because the private companies complain that they will lose business if the government do so. So there's a turn of the policy on the subsidy. And furthermore, the election cycles makes it even more impossible to shift from the over-reliance on the subsidies. Every time during the electoral campaigns that each party tries to increase the subsidies, I'm not saying that we do not need the subsidy. I am a beneficiary of such child care policy, the subsidy. But what I'm pointing out is that the lack of systematic solution to address the needs of parents, including lowering the labor hours and building up public child care system. After all, the amount of about $100 per month subsidy is not enough to persuade people to have kids. So Dr. Guo mentions about the 25% of the total GDP on the government budget to the social welfare. That is a very high percentage. However, the problem is that in the Taiwan's total tax revenue as percentage of GDP is very, very low. It's among the lowest in the world. So it's just cut half in the past 2 decades. So that's a big problem. Even if we have a very high percentage of the budget, the percentage of the budget, the total amount of budget is not enough to tackle with these demographic challenges. So overall, the plans using subsidies may be right now the easiest way for the politician to show your commitment and awareness of demographic problems. But each policy needs a lot of money, and that needs 1 or 2 decades to take effect. So no politicians are willing to deal with that immediately. So let me switch to next topic. One solution to delay the demographic challenge is open to immigration. Introducing foreign immigrant workers partly mitigates the pressure on the labor market of the shortage of laborers. Opening to a new economic market is also a solution to economic growth. Because Taiwan has no real left and right parties or the socialist parties, the party parties often debate on how much we should open to or we should rely on China, instead of debating on the left-right policy spectrum. So President Ma Ying-jeou between 2008 and 2016 believed that by strengthening the cross-strait ties, Taiwan's economy can gain momentum led by China. Obviously, it was not very successful, and there were national security concerns. After President Taiwan took power, she adopted the new southbound policy in order to pursue new investment and expand bilateral relations with Southeast Asian countries. This is not easy because Taiwan has long been highly interdependent with China, and due to China's pressure in international politics, it is very difficult to quickly break through China's isolation attempts. President Tsai also carried out pension reforms, labor law amendments, and series of reforms to deal with economic pressures on individuals, especially the younger generations. However, some policies are facing huge backlash, such as the pension reform. And some policies are not very successful, such as the labor law amendment to lower the crazy long working hours. So anyway, we can see different approaches to deal with the high income traps. So lastly, the last issue I want to talk about is one common issue between Taiwan and the US. So when dealing with economic declines and the prominent population growth, the US seems to rely on Chinese immigrants and Chinese students. And in particular, many American colleges see Chinese students as the main source of the recruitment. For example, in my school, Michigan State University, there are 1/10 of students coming from China, and 1/8 of undergraduate students are Chinese students. That is the number in 2016. I'm not sure the latest one. Perhaps this is a common phenomenon in the world, not only in the US. And it also happens in Taiwan for the private school as well. As the number of international students increase, it may contribute to increasing diversity in campus, which is good, and boost local economy for sure. However, during the past couple of years, there are more and more clashes of values. For example, the US now closing the Confucius Institute in universities due to intervening academic autonomy and the freedom of speech. Reports saying that some Chinese student associations are spying or monitoring students or scholars. I myself are warned by some Chinese student association too, because of my articles on Facebook. Although I'm not from China, so they do a lot of activities. The recent anti-government movements in Hong Kong further stimulates Chinese nationalism, which has already been activated or weaponized, or even weaponized by President Xi Jinping's campaign of the Chinese Dream since 2012. We saw that Chinese students tear down the Lennon walls in many places and crash into the demonstration in support of Hong Kongers in many places in the world. So the fire finally outbreak into American popular culture. If you are sports fans or esports fans, then you will definitely notice the latest one that China is boycotting NBA only because of Twitter saying "Fight for Freedom, stand with Hong Kong," tweeted by Houston Rockets general manager. Also, the electronic gaming company Blizzard has kowtowed to China by firing and confiscating award prizes of the host and the players who expressed support to Hong Kong. Yeah. So it is on fire in the RED edit. The forum right now. So many American people are very furious about this kowtow. Well, more and more Americans and people from the world start to realize how Taiwan has been bullied for decades. Have you seen the latest episode of South Park? Do you think the story is crazy? No, it's not, because the Taiwanese have already known that, but the world just begins to see how crazy is China's censorship and weaponized nationalism. We can say that due to the large size of population and previous years of economic growth, China helps to maintain economic momentum in many places and filling the gap of demographic decline in many places. However, when the pursuit of Chinese nationalism and authoritarian values being radicalized, we may have to talk more about how to counterbalance the impact of the sharp power on our societies. I will stop. Yes.
Thank you, Fang-Yu, for your very insightful discussion. I really like your political science analysis on kind of the structural limitations to the Taiwanese government pursuing more systematic, long-term kind of policy and how Taiwanese politicians are focused more on subsidies, but it's very difficult to change this trend, especially during times of elections or electoral cycles. So that's very interesting. And now we'll move to Nicholas Eberstadt, who will discuss the demographic situation in Japan and South Korea, and if there are any kind of lessons that Taiwan can take from those.
Thank you very much for inviting me, and thank you, Mr. Chen, for these excellent presentations. I learned quite a bit from them. I thought maybe I'd even broaden the perspective to include mainland China, because there's relevance here too. If you look at Japan and South Korea and Taiwan and Hong Kong and urban China, the demographic profiles are quite similar. You have shrinking, aging, rapidly aging population in Japan. You have rapidly aging populations in all of the other places I mentioned. And also, by my own homework, publishing this next month, if you look only at urban China, it looks as if people with urban hukou in China have already reached the peak and are now beginning to commence not just aging, but long-term population decline with absent migration. So there are some commonalities to all of these. I'd make a couple of generalizations here. Generalization number one, what's causing rapid aging and eventual population decline in the places we are talking about is very, very low fertility levels. In terms of population arithmetic, it's not longevity that makes for aging societies so much as small families. It's counterintuitive. It took me a long time to kind of get this through my head when I started learning about this stuff. But you can think of it kind of this way. If the base, if the population base of the pyramid is squeezed like that, it means there's relatively more people at the top. So the lower the birth rate for the longer period of time, the greater the society is going to be. It's just a turbocharger for that. The second kind of generalization for all of these places, I think, is that it's going to be, I suppose the cautious academic term would be extraordinarily difficult for pronatal policy to make much of an impact on total fertility rates in these areas. There is a big debate within the little world of demography about just how much one can expect from pronatal policies in terms of demographic outcomes. And I'm kind of on one side of this, so truth in advertising, there is another side. My own impression is this. I have been strongly convinced by the research of Lance Pritchett and Larry Summers at Harvard that the single best predictor of fertility rates in societies all around the world over time, different ethnicities, different countries, different periods of time, is how many children women say they want. It's desired family size. And that makes kind of sense because we're not rabbits or robots. I mean, there is some human agency in this. If that is the case, absent or barring big changes in desired family size, you have relatively limited scope, no matter how much one is willing to spend on pronatal policies. So until such time as there is some sort of ideological or religious or other change in worldview, I think we probably should consider steeply sub-replacement fertility as part of the background noise in all of the places that we're talking about. Third thing, the blessing of healthy aging that we have all discuss doesn't look like it's going to stop. And it's not clear where the limits to this are. Rising life expectancy isn't just a matter of declining infant mortality rates. Death rates at every age are declining and continuing to decline. The life expectancy at age 80 is increasing. Life expectancy at age 90 is increasing. Life expectancy at age 100 is increasing. And this is a tremendously good thing. What we see in all of the areas I've mentioned is not just an improvement in life expectancy, but also an improvement in active, healthy life expectancy. And the background here, of course, as well, is there's a tremendous and I think kind of relentless improvement in education. So you've got this big increase in human resources at all of these older ages that we're describing. And this is just a natural, wonderful background for policies that capitalize upon what Dr. Paul said, capitalizing upon healthy aging. Bismarck had his own reason for wanting retirement pensions to start at age 65. That was when Prussia had 1880s life expectancy. It's a notional. Live longer, work longer, save longer. The opportunities are all there. Now this is where things get a little bit tricky, because we then get into the whole political economy of aging question. We have all around the world, we have pay-as-you-go pension systems, which are wonderful when the population pyramid looks like this, but you don't have to be a demographer to know how it works when the population pyramid looks like this. We've got to move towards self-financed pension systems over the long haul, and towards more flexible working arrangements so that people can work longer at older ages and contribute more to their own retirement and to saving for their families and so forth. So one of the lessons you can learn from Japan is what not to do. Knowing what not to do is probably as important as knowing what to do. One of the, to me, extreme policy errors that Japan has committed in the past generation was to fix upon a zero or near zero interest rate at the Bank of Japan. Now that doesn't sound like an aging policy or anything like that, but macro matters. And what this has meant in the Japanese context is that Japanese seniors and Japanese elders who have accumulated great savings in bonds are getting approximately a zero coupon on their bonds. And there are a lot of older Japanese voters. What the upshot of all of this is that, in effect, Japanese taxpayers have made up the difference what the bond coupons would have been in terms of pension transfers to older Japanese. And the Japanese taxpayers have also decided they don't want to pay for this themselves, so they will have the unborn generations pay for them. This is also known as public debt. And so we see this situation emerging there. It makes it harder for a lot of things to happen in Japan. There are some particularities in the South Korean situation that we don't think are quite as relevant elsewhere. We can talk about a notional eventual unification of Taiwan and China, but the North-South unification question is a much more active and fraught one. And much of what will be in play for South Korea is a question of how to eventually integrate a perhaps slightly more youthful, but very much less educated and healthy northern population into a common economy. And the South Korean answer to this so far has been, let's postpone this. Let's deal with it like never, or almost never, after the North somehow magically becomes reformed and prosperous and a suitable bride for the South. Two more things just to mention. Demographers and policymakers use the data they have. They can't use the data they don't have. Some of the data that no one collects, almost no one collects, has to do with kinship networks and extended families. States in Asia and states in the Mediterranean 2,000 and more years ago began doing their census and demography stuff. They'd count households because that helped with tax. They counted individuals because that helped with military mobilization. We're still on the same track that we had from the Roman Empire and from Tsuann, from the Han. Extended family matters, and it matters a lot in ways that aren't currently being counted. Japan is the pioneer here because they've had below replacement fertility longer than any other country in the modern era. They started in the 1950s. Japanese demographers have done some interesting, but I think rather arresting work, suggesting that a young woman born in 1990 today is slightly more likely than not to have no grandchildren in the course of her life. She's about almost 40% odds of being childless, but slightly over 50% odds of having no biological grandchildren. So think about that one. Think about what the future aging Japan looks like beyond the head count. Not just talking about more seniors, we're talking about more social isolate, kinless seniors, right? Who takes care of these people if it's not their kin? Well, maybe it will be robots, and maybe it will be cute little artificial bunnies or whatever you see in the future. But most likely it's going to be some sort of state program. And one lesson we've learned from all around the world over the last century is that the government is a very, very, very expensive substitute for the family. And it's not that good one either. So this adds a wrinkle not just for Japan, but for all of the demographic geese that are flying in the same kind of general trajectory. And just to mention one final point here, another, let's say, it's not exactly a wild card because it's so predictable. Deals with long-term care, and I think that's a very important point of our overall discussion for all of these countries. Within long-term care, let's talk about dementia and Alzheimer's. Dementia and Alzheimer's is extraordinarily human resource intensive. The care is extraordinarily intensive. Dr. Kuo mentioned the numbers of people who are leaving the labor market to take care of loved ones and relatives. As populations age, on current medical knowledge basis, we can expect more and more and more of this. And of course, Japan is in the forefront. The reason is because there is a curve like this from age 80 upwards in the risk of dementia and Alzheimer's. Dementia and Alzheimer's are one of the curious areas in the modern health sciences where enormous expenditures and investments in research haven't yet really paid off. It's curious, it's almost the only one I can think of where we haven't had much of an impact. I assume we will. I assume eventually we will have that. But until we have that silver bullet, the combination of greater risk of Alzheimer's and fraying of extended family networks, I think makes a social and economic risk for all of the areas that we're discussing that we'll have to pay more attention to in the future.
Thank you, Nicholas, for your very insightful discussion, especially about the loss of the kinship networks and what greater difficulties that would bring for senior care. So we'll have about 20 minutes for a moderated discussion, and then we will open it up to the floor for Q&A. I guess up to this point, we've been characterizing kind of the agency that Taiwanese women have in determining whether or not they want to have more kids. But I think it would be remiss to neglect the fact that Taiwan's abortion rate is very high in Asia. And I was just looking through some statistics that on average there are about 200,000 newborns born each year in Taiwan. But you have doctors, gynecologists saying that some 400,000 women are using the RU-486 abortion medicine a year. And coupled with women who undergo surgical abortions, that number would be pretty high. So then you can see why Taiwan's birth rate is pretty low. I've seen various different estimates. I don't know if Dr. Wood, you have more authoritative sources, but there's one gynecologist who predicts that there's as many as or up to 500,000 abortions a year in Taiwan. And gynecologist said that of the women who are pregnant, 1/3 keep their pregnancies, and he assumes that the rest terminate them. So I think this is a growing issue in Taiwan that directly does impact the birth rate. And you have also instances of teenagers who get pregnant, teenagers in middle school, high school, and there are studies that say that more than 80% will probably get an abortion, and they do need, if they're younger than 18, they need their parent or guardian's consent. And I can envision a scenario where you have a teenager who gets pregnant, she's still in high school maybe. Her parents start to worry, how is she finish school, how is she go to college, how is she going to find a job, get married. They don't want to hear gossip from neighbors and family members. So you have this, I think, this stigma in Taiwan against unmarried mothers that kind of outweighs, or is far greater than the stigma or shame of getting an abortion. So I think that the Taiwanese government will not only have to deal with these low birth rates, but also unplanned pregnancies in Taiwan, many of which are terminated through abortion. So I was just wondering, Dr. Guo, if you can maybe talk about how the Taiwanese government has, tried to balance the two. On the one hand, you're encouraging, people to have more children, but on the other hand, you have this situation where abortions are kind of just skyrocketing. That's one question I have for you, and also in regard to your presentation about the older adults in poverty, and how what sorts of government policies do you think need to be made to kind of assist those older adults? You said older women probably, and also if people are dropping out of the labor force to take care of their aging parents, what happens? Should we turn towards foreign workers or workers from Southeast Asia, or how do we fill in the unemployment gap for the
30,000 per year? As the president of the Taiwan Association of Family Caregivers, we are the main policy advocacy organization in Taiwan, which is already in existence for 22 years. That's the oldest in the entire Asian countries. We are advocating for two things. One is to have an official family leave policy for caregiving. I know the United States has one. We kind of had one for the public servants, but not for everyone. But in Taiwan, it's a very strange phenomenon that even though you are entitled to holidays and days off at work, like certain days, a certain number of days per year, people just don't take time off for some reason. They just don't want to. People work so hard. But we are a lot for the first time aligned with a lot of women's organizations advocating for family days leave for caregiving. And another start raising the awareness of employers that have to be responsible for taking care of their employees and to create more family caregiving friendly working environment for employees. So there are a couple of, for instance, like companies that instead of like in the past that they establish childcare for employees, now they are establishing adult daycare for their employees. So people can take their parents to work and then just drop them on next door at the adult daycare. So there are a couple of model service programs in Taiwan like that. And also maybe to encourage employers to have more flexible working hours and more creative ways. This is a hard endeavor because nobody wants to pay more, spend more benefits for employees, but it is really, really needed. And what we are
to put it simply, there are many structural factors that causes from the poverty cause high income trap. That is a low working hours, low growth rate on the real wages. Also not affordable housing prices and the lack of the public care system, and maybe the shaky pension system. So the next problems or next bombs to explore is the labor insurance and the pension system. That is the next big problems for the next administration, no matter DPP or KMT to take power. So that is the next bomb. So all these problems needs a lot of money and needs a lot of time to deal with. But however, I don't think there's a adequate political agenda to talk about this, because every political issues will finally goes to the China factor, and then everybody will initiate the referendum to be anti the gay marriage. So and that partly explains why there's a fiasco for the ruling party last year in the local election. So next year, so the referendum will hold maybe next year or within 2 years. That will be another battlefield to deal with these demographic changes.
All right, thank you. And then Nicholas, you mentioned that it's very difficult for the pro-natal kind of policies to ultimately make an impact on the demographic outcome. And you seem to suggest that there should be more focus than on elderly care. But you mentioned, the absence of these kinship networks. Then, if you don't have these, kinship networks, then I think, are you suggesting that the government then will need to come up with some sort of policies to help with the elderly care?
We focus upon health care, and we should. And we focus upon pensions, and we should. But I would suggest that there's a whole lot more that we need to think about as we conceptualize the way that societies successfully deal with healthy aging, with both not just the risks, but also the fantastic opportunities that are here. I mentioned that we don't collect data on extended family networks. That's one thing we don't collect data on. Another thing that most governments don't collect data on is wealth. We've got lots and lots of info on GNP, GNI, GDI, and that's great. There are no corresponding estimates of any sort of depth and accuracy for wealth holdings for populations around the world. We've got some in the US, we've got some in a couple of other places. What I would submit is that, yes, we need to look at healthcare, long-term care, pension policies, but what we really want to look at is wealth and making wealth grow as fast as we possibly can now for this next generation, which they use some of that wealth. And so what does that mean? It means better health, better education, more research and development, more flexible economic policies, trying to do things that might improve productivity, increase efficiency. Does migration come into this? In places that are capable of assimilating migrants in an effective way, yes, for sure. So something certainly to consider. But even more than any of the other things that we've all talked about, eyes on the prize should be on maximizing the race for wealth for societies, because that's going to be the resource that's going to give you all sorts of opportunities for dealing with aging and shrinking populations in the future.
Thank you. You mentioned that there's things that we shouldn't copy Japan regarding the aging population, but are there any good lessons that we could possibly consider, or
Sure.
Taiwan could consider from Japan's experience?
Look at how fantastically successful Japan has been in improving health levels for society. Japan is the world's leader in life expectancy, and it has been the leader for over 40 years, as I recall. Japan is the existence proof that you don't hit a ceiling. That every time people talk about reaching the barrier, the limits to improvements in life expectancy, somebody just breaks that barrier. And so I would say that of all of the different aspects that one can look at in Japan, I would say Japan's economic policies are largely kind of a mess. But that the human capital generating engine in Japan has been fantastically successful, and trying to understand just how much of that has been due to government policy, how much of that has been due to things that government doesn't have anything to do with, because social capital in Japan. I think there's a lot to learn from that.
Okay, great, thank you. So we'll open the floor to questions from the audience. We have someone bringing the mic, so please raise your hand and then identify yourself.
I'm Fang-Yu. I'm a retired public health service captain. All my life has been engaging in preventive medicine. I have one question to both Dr. Paul and Ms. Chen. It's regarding not much of the in addition to the low fertility rate, I would like to hear your comment about the composition of the newborns. I remember, used to be 100% of the newborns that are born to residents in Taiwan. However, in the 90s, the demography started to change. And there's a lot of so-called foreign bride, as you may know, aware of this. And I think not just today, maybe 10 to 15 years ago, number of the newborn babies born to foreign bride has been increased to 1 in 8 newborn In other words, 1 in 8 newborns born to foreign bride. And I want to your comments about those children are probably close to the working age now. And I want to comment about the implication of this demographic shift on political inclination, so to speak, and also social changes, because a lot of them, they were born like foreign bride, they may not even speak fluently Chinese, and they have very limited educations and so on and so forth. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
We do see, well, last congressional election, we had the KMT party actually had 1 seat appointed by foreign, what's called foreign bride, but we call it new resident from Cambodia. And that was a significant history in Taiwan because for the first time that somebody from a foreign country who can be a public, political, appointees, congressional seat. So, but in terms of the composition of the newborns, yes, you're right. 1 in every, now I think 7, was born by a new resident. But the percentage of new residents who come to Taiwan, marry Taiwanese, has been declining. I think the peak was about 10 years ago. Now, just to tell you a little something really light, I work in a medical university, and then so one time that we started a project that we wanted to really increase the health awareness of the new residents, these people who came from abroad. And then so our medical students decided they wanted to do a health education on birth prevention and all that, because they kind of think that they needed some kind of protection. And then so they went to the organization that serves the new residents, and all these women looking at our medical students and said, we don't need that. Our children are already in teenagers. We know how to protect ourselves, So we are all way off the producing babies in our age. So we still think that a lot of new residents, they are giving birth, but then the first wave, of the children, we call the new Taiwan citizens, they are indeed in their college age and entering the workforce. Unfortunately, for me as a professor in the university, we don't really have any information on that, because most of the students, they don't identify their parents, who their parents are. And because of the growing development, a lot of children or students who have their parents from abroad, they don't really mention it. Part of it because they don't want to be looked down if one of their parents were from Southeast Asian countries. So this is indeed an issue. On the one side, we do see some the new Taiwanese citizens, or we call rising, and then they are actually taking a big part of Tsai's government, President Tsai's government, on the new Southeast Asian policy. They are because of they tend to know a lot of their culture from their mother, and some of them do speak Vietnamese and Thai and all these Southeast Asian country languages. So they are playing a big part of the role in the new government's extension to the Southeast Asian policies. But on the other hand, on the other side, I guess people are hiding their identity, because they don't want to be seen as a disadvantage. So this is something that we really have to work out. Thank you.
There are very harsh debates on whether we should teach the mother language in schools, also on many other related policies. And there's no consensus among the party politics. But and recently, the KMT candidates, presidential candidates, had a very discriminative speech on the new immigrants. However, However, I don't think that is unique to KMT because I think the older generation. Am I just discriminating the older generations? But from the poll shows that overall Taiwanese society is just kind of discriminated to the foreigners and the new immigrants. So it's not unique to KMT, but I think we have a lot to do. I think the new southbound policy is one of the efforts to fill in the gap that Taiwanese don't really understand the Southeast Asian countries, although we are located there. So that's one thing we have to do.
We can take more questions. You can raise your hand. Russell.
Russell Shell, Global Taiwan Institute. My question is for Nicholas. I know the scope of our discussion today is primarily focused on the economic and political aspects of demographic trends, but I know you study this issue inside and out. I was wondering if you could speak to some of the security implications of the other countries that you studied. What are the issues that they're sort of grappling with in Korea and Japan about potential security implications of demographic trends on basic? What, and what can we draw from? Because I know the Taiwan faces somewhat of a unique predicament because of the cross-strait relationship.
Sure.
But nonetheless, I'd be interested to hear what Japan and Korea is going through regarding these challenges.
Well, thank you for the question, Russell. To begin with, I think we can say that in all of the rich aging societies, whether in East Asia, Europe, North America, all of the affluent societies where populations are rapidly and markedly aging, there's a political economy problem. And that is that voters have revealed they have essentially an endless demand for social welfare services and social welfare benefits, especially health care and pension benefits. And to date, we have seen those crowd out defense expenditures or threaten to crowd out defense expenditures. I'm oversimplifying and exaggerating, but not fundamentally misrepresenting the situation to say that voters have an endless demand for social services and don't want to spend a penny more than they absolutely have to on defense. And that's in a way kind of natural. But this means that there's a structural problem for South Korea and Japan in their hub-spoke security relationship with the United States, because the US is virtually the only affluent society where population is on track to continue to grow, working age population and military age population are on track to continue to grow, aging is on track to grow rather slowly, whereas decline is in the future for the working age and military age populations in the ROK in Japan. It means that ROK and Japan need the US more and more, while they are prospectively both less capable and less willing to fill in this security vacuum. So that's one problem that we see from the demographics. But it's not all just for the West. There are also significant demographic security problems for mainland China. One demographic security-related problem, the extraordinary imbalance between baby boys and baby girls over the last generation. Now there are tens of millions of essentially unmarriageable young men in China, and they tilt towards poorly educated and rural. Do we think that this is a factor that will have no impact on China's social stability? Maybe, maybe not. Similarly, the Chinese government has this urbanization drive to try to increase or slow down the decline in economic growth. Under the circumstance of the hukou system, this means that the peasants who are coming from the countryside to urban China are, in effect, illegal aliens in their own country. They, for the most part, don't have right to social services, can't bring their families. They get ripped off in the labor market because they don't get the same sort of compensation as locals with the same skills. And, heaven help them if they get into a fight with somebody who's got local hukou, they'll lose no matter what the facts of the matter are. That looks to me like a tinderbox. Tinderboxes don't always catch fire, but until that's solved, that's a security problem for China itself. And another one which I'd mentioned, the last one for China, is what the rise of the one-child family means for China's international ambitions in military. Remember what we saw back in, I think it was 2008, when there was that terrible earthquake in Sichuan, and all of those poor children in the schools perished, even as the party buildings right next to them didn't collapse in the earthquakes, and all of the fury that people had because their family lines were ended. Well, take that as a kind of background information and do the thought experiment about what happens about a military encounter for China, where a lot of only children don't come home. Is China going to have high casualty aversion or low casualty aversion? That's the first question. I can't answer that for you, but it's an important question. And then the next level of the game is, does Chinese leadership think that the population has high casualty aversion or low casualty aversion? But I think that also has some very important implications for security in the area as a whole.
Are there any other questions?
Hey, Gareth Van Norwich, thanks very much for excellent presentation. I have a follow-up question on the new immigrants. Tsuann, you said that the percentage of new immigrants is declining, but that group also has a higher birth rate than the rest of the population, right? Isn't that compensating for the decline in the overall population? And one other aspect of the new immigrants is the people from the Philippines who are very much at the center of the caregiving population. With an increased need of caregiving, isn't that population growing or not? Are there any statistics on that?
I'll answer the labor for caregiving. Currently, I think before when Taiwan opened up foreign care workers it was Philippines that topped the percentage, but right now it's the Indonesians who compose about 75% of the entire care worker population. And the whole foreign care workers together, there are about 280,000 of them in Taiwan. That takes about 20% of the entire family caregiving labor force. So about, in other words, Taiwan, like 1/5 of the care forces are foreign workers. And there's constant pressure of families or people who wanted to hire foreign care worker and can't get one because now it's getting more competitive. And then, so the Department of Labor is forced to open up more fair care workers. But the Department of Health and Welfare is trying to produce a lot of incentives for domestic people, for people in Taiwan to be honored, to be, be capable of becoming caregiver domestic by ourselves. So there's always this conflict But it is increasing. And then right now it takes about 1/5 of the entire care population. And your first question, and then other question about the new residents. Yes, they are still probably giving more births than the people in Taiwan. But the total number is shrinking, you know. So that's all I know actually.
Mike?
Thanks for a very interesting presentation. I'm Mike Fonte. I work with DPP here in Washington. So kind of bigger question, I guess, the question of inequality in Taiwan, question of tax base, et cetera. There are other models to look at besides Japan and South Korea, of course. And a bunch of questions about the social welfare state, shall we say, in Europe, and how well they implement their programs. But it seems to me that there's a point to be made by Democratic Progressive Party, after all, it's at least lean social democrat in its basic orientation. I wonder whether there can't be more thought about tax base rising, so there's more income, trying to deal with the inequality problem, because I think that unless that's dealt with, some of the response to somebody like Han-Yu and Kaohsiung comes off of that concern, right? So just a little bit random thoughts here, but it seems to me there ought to be some thought given to, and there probably has been a lot of it, to what can we learn from not Japan, but Sweden or some of the other places which have.
I have a question to the panel about generation and identity, state identity. 正大选举中心就是 Election Center and PTL Public Television recently did a survey, 2,232 youth between age 15 to 18 about their identity towards whether they're Taiwanese or Chinese or both. This kind of thing that we asking since 1990 to the population in general, but first time they do it for 15 to 18. And the number came back 78.7% identified themselves as Taiwanese, and only 20% as Chinese, which is very different to the overall population. And on the question of unification versus independence and so on and so forth, about 27% think that it should be status quo and then deal with it later, and 20% say it should remain status quo forever, and only about 8% think that we should go for unification. Do you think that's just a blip because of the summer 2019, what's happening right now, or that's a trend that is going to continue in the future?
The growing Chinese identity is a long-term trend, and I don't think it is reversible, because that it is quite natural for us because we live in Taiwan, and the identity, the community, the border are based on Taiwan, not in China. So I think that will be a trend that will continue. So also there's a little correction that you mentioned 20% people say they are Chinese. Actually no, that's only 3%, and some 10 to 20% people think that they are both Chinese and Taiwanese. That's a lot of difference. So that's very different. So and yes, there's a latest poll shows that about 50% of the younger generation thinks that we should seek independence later or immediately. So the number hit record high this year. I think that's partly due to what happened in Hong Kong, but that is also a long-term trend. So the Hong Kong event just accelerates this trend, not a dramatic change. So yeah, so maybe the attitudes of Xi Jinping and his speech in January is also a major factor that accelerates this trend. Yeah.
I do want to share a story because I teach at a university in Taiwan, and then I am a social work professor. I take a group of students to do service learning in Hong Kong almost every other year. And then we go to the poorest side of Hong Kong. And this summer, right before all the chaos and the demonstration, we went again. And every time, it was really interesting that the new, this new generation of Taiwanese college students, most of them, even though when they were surveyed, they had to like make a choice or pick an answer, but they don't really think of identity that much often. But then this summer, especially when we went to Hong Kong, and then every night when we have the debriefing, and then students will start to tell me the stories they encounter. And then it's interesting, almost every single one told me that they were treated extra nice after when they said they're from Taiwan. So they said, can you believe there's a difference? They were very surprised and told me that, it's like, people are not so friendly and waiting in line and shopping or whatever. And then if they say I'm from Taiwan, they are treated extra nice, So, and then similar stories in Japan as well. So, I don't want to discriminate anything or imply anything, but it's just that the young people are, even though internet, everything is very global, but the young people don't really start to feel it until they really see it and see it in their face and experience it. So, I think it has some implication to this. Yeah. So thank you.
I want to thank our panelists for their very insightful remarks, and I think it has given us a lot of information for us to better understand Taiwan's demographic challenges on its economy, its politics, potential national security issues, and I think for me, thinking about elderly care and these are kind of practical issues to think about. So I want to thank them for coming, and also thank you guys for all coming, and just want to give them a round of applause.